Get out. What are you doing here? You weren't invited yesterday. Gary's face was a twisted mask of anger at the wedding I was paying for. I just smiled, hiding the sharp sting of his words. I'll go, I said calmly. But first, meet my special guest, an old friend of yours. When he saw who it was, his eyes went wide with pure terror. He fainted. Justice was just getting started. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tell me the time where you are. The front door slammed, rattling the pictures on the wall. Dad, I'm getting married. Judy burst in, breathless and red-faced, shoving her left hand at me. The big diamond ring caught the light, spraying tiny rainbows everywhere. I put down my coffee. The TV news kept chattering in the background. Congratulations, sweetie. When did Gary? Last night, at that Italian place downtown. Her voice was sharp, ready for an argument before I'd even said anything. She yanked off her coat, tossing it onto my armchair. I know what you're thinking. What am I thinking? That he's not good enough, that I'm rushing into things, that I should wait longer, get to know him better, blah, blah, blah. She walked to the window, then spun around. Well, I'm 28, Dad. I can make my own choices. I looked at her, at the tight smile, the way her fingers kept twisting the ring. 40 years of selling houses taught me how to read people. The ones who talked the fastest usually had the most to hide. Have you set a date? June 15th. That gives us 2 months to plan everything. She sat on the edge of the couch like she might jump up and run away at any second. Gary wants something fancy, really elegant, a wedding that everyone will talk about. 2 months is pretty fast for, we don't want to wait. The words exploded from her. Why should we? When you know, right? That's what you always said about Mom. The comparison hurt. It wasn't true. Your mother and I dated for 3 years before we got engaged, but pointing that out would just make Judy angrier. Where are you thinking of having it? The Fairmont. Gary knows people there. She smoothed her skirt, not looking at me. It'll be beautiful. About 200 guests. 200 guests at the Fairmont. I did some quick math in my head. I didn't like the answer. That sounds expensive. It'll cost about $50,000, maybe $60,000. She finally looked at me, chin high. I know it's a lot, but this is my wedding, Dad. My one wedding. I want it to be perfect. There it was. The real reason for the dramatic entrance, the edgy attitude, the rushed plans. Gary wanted a super expensive wedding, and Judy wanted me to pay for it. $50,000. You said you'd help when I got married. You promised Mom before she died that you'd give me a proper wedding. Her voice cracked a little. Don't tell me you're breaking that promise now. She was right. I had promised Helen. But Helen would have spent months getting to know Gary, asking questions, making sure he was worthy of our daughter. Helen would have seen right through his smooth talk in about 5 minutes. Of course, I'll help with the wedding. The words came out before I could stop them. But maybe we could talk about the money. Thank you. She jumped up and kissed my cheek. Her mood changed so fast it gave me whiplash. Gary's going to be so excited. He's been worried about the money, trying to figure out how to make it work on his startup budget. Another warning sign. What kind of man asks a woman to marry him when he can't pay for the wedding? Maybe I should take Gary out for dinner, get to know my future son-in-law better. That would be great. He's been wanting to talk to you about his business ideas. He really looks up to successful people like you. She grabbed her coat, suddenly eager to leave. I should go tell him the good news about the wedding money. She was at the door before I could even stand up. Judy, wait. Love you, Dad. Thank you for understanding. The door closed softly, leaving me alone with the sound of the TV and the echo of her words. I stared at the closed door for a long time. The house felt too quiet, too empty. $50,000 for a wedding to a man I barely knew, for a daughter who suddenly felt like a stranger. I turned off the TV and carried my coffee cup to the kitchen. The house felt different after Judy's whirlwind visit, full of unspoken worries and unfinished talks. I rinsed the cup, going through my usual evening routine, while my mind replayed every word, every defensive move. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the casserole I'd made for dinner, Helen's recipe, though I never made it quite as well as she did. I wiped the counters, straightened the dish towel, anything to keep my hands busy while my thoughts churned. $50,000. The number kept coming back, sharp and demanding my attention. I walked to my study, pulled by something I couldn't name. The room held 20 years of my life. Business awards gathering dust, photo albums Helen had organized perfectly, tax papers filed in neat order. I took one of the albums from the shelf, its leather cover soft with age. The photos told a different story than tonight's conversation. Here was Judy at 5, missing front teeth giggling on my shoulders at the fair. At 10, proudly showing off her science project about volcanoes. High school graduation, tears streaming down her face as she hugged both of us. College move-in day, trying to look grown up but secretly scared. When had she become so fragile, so quick to think I disapproved? Maybe I did disapprove. Gary Thompson had come into our lives 6 months ago with his expensive suits and vague talk about new technology. He mentioned investors I'd never heard of and used fancy business words that meant nothing. But Judy's eyes lit up when he talked, like she was seeing a genius, not just a performance. I flipped to Helen's favorite photo of the three of us from Judy's college graduation. We looked so complete then, so sure about the future. Helen had been gone 2 years now, but her absence still hit me sometimes. She would have known how to handle tonight's talk. Helen could have asked the tough questions without making Judy angry. The empty house pressed in on me, filled with the weight of conversations Helen and I would never have, decisions I'd have to make alone. Parenting didn't end when your child turned 18. If anything, it got harder. At least when Judy was little, I could protect her from scraped knees and bullies. How do you protect a grown daughter from her own choices? My phone buzzed. A text message. Judy, Gary says dinner tomorrow night at 7. Angelo's on Rush Street. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, looking forward to it. Maybe I was being unfair. Maybe my need to protect her was making me see things wrong. Gary might be exactly what he seemed, a young businessman in love with my daughter, the expensive wedding, the borrowed charm, the way he seemed to appear whenever money was being talked about. Maybe those were all just coincidences. I closed the photo album and put it back on the shelf. Tomorrow night, I'd give Gary Thompson a fair chance. I'd ask about his business, his plans for the future, what he wanted with Judy. I'd be the father-in-law he expected, not the suspicious businessman I'd become. The old clock in the hall chimed 10:30. Time for bed, though I doubted I'd sleep easily. I turned off the study lights and went upstairs, already planning what to talk about at dinner tomorrow. Common ground, shared interests, the kind of base you build relationships on. If Gary was going to be family, I'd find a way to make it work. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting my tie for the 3rd time. The dark blue silk was Helen's favorite. She'd given it to me for our 20th anniversary, saying it made my eyes stand out. Tonight felt important enough for Helen's tie, important enough for my best cufflinks and the cologne I saved for special events. 7:15. I planned to arrive exactly on time, not so early I'd seem eager, not so late I'd seem uninterested. Angelo's on Rush Street was Gary's choice, a fancy Italian place that probably cost more for one meal than I used to spend on a week's groceries. But if this was Gary's way of trying to impress me, I'd go along with it. I checked my wallet, credit cards, cash, business cards in case the talk turned professional. My phone showed no new messages from Judy since yesterday's dinner confirmation. No last-minute changes, no nervous texts asking me to be nice to Gary. Maybe she trusted this would go well. Maybe she was just sure Gary could handle himself. The drive downtown would take 30 minutes in evening traffic. I grabbed my keys and headed for the garage, going over conversation starters in my head. Ask about his business, not the vague, new technology nonsense, but real details. How he made money, his clients, how he planned to grow. The kind of questions that showed if someone actually understood their own company. Sports might be safer. The Cubs were doing okay in spring training. The Bulls were rebuilding again. Neutral topics that didn't need personal confessions or deep business checks. Though Gary seemed more like a golf talk type. Expensive courses, exclusive clubs, the kind of networking that happened over 18 holes. I backed out of the driveway, noticing the evening light filtering through the oak trees on my street. April in Chicago meant hope, winter finally breaking, the promise of warmth ahead. Maybe that's what tonight meant too. New beginnings, family growing, the natural path of life that I'd been resisting. Helen would have loved planning a wedding. She'd have driven Judy crazy with food tastings and flower choices, but in the best way. She'd have found things in common with Gary, brought him into the family with her gift for making people feel welcome. I wasn't Helen, but I could try to act like her tonight. Traffic moved smoothly down the highway. I'd left early, so arriving a few minutes ahead wouldn't hurt. It might even give me a chance to watch how Gary treated the restaurant staff. How a man treated people who served him told you everything about his true character. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, keeping my focus on the road and the conversation ahead. Tonight was about building bridges, finding ways to connect with the man who wanted to marry my daughter. Whatever business call was coming in could wait. The Chicago skyline spread before me as I got closer to downtown. Glass buildings reflecting the setting sun. This was Gary's world. Fancy restaurants, city sophistication, the kind of life that came with money and ambition. Maybe that's what drew Judy in. After growing up in Oak Park's quiet, tree-lined suburbs, the city's energy probably felt exciting, full of possibilities. I found parking 2 blocks from Angelo's and checked my reflection one last time in the rearview mirror. Gray hair neatly combed, tie straight, jacket pressed. I looked like what I was, a successful businessman meeting his future son-in-law for dinner, professional but kind, interested but not prying. The evening air carried the smell of early spring as I walked towards the restaurant. In 2 hours I'd know if Gary Thompson was worthy of my daughter's love and my money. Tonight would set the tone for whatever relationship we'd have from now on. Time to find out what kind of man wanted to join our family. The hostess at Angelo's led me through the main dining room to a private area in the back. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over white tablecloths. The soft buzz of conversation created a fancy, expensive atmosphere. I straightened my shoulders, ready to put in the effort this evening would need. The private dining room had a table for 8, already full except for one empty chair. Gary stood up as I approached, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Here's our generous sponsor," he announced to the table, loud enough for everyone to hear. The other guests, Gary's sister, 2 business partners, and an older couple I didn't know, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Judy shot Gary a warning look, but he completely ignored her. "Gary," I said, holding out my hand, determined to start fresh. "Thank you for arranging this dinner." He gripped my hand a little too tightly. "Of course, especially when you have such deep pockets for wedding expenses." I sat down, noticing how Gary had placed himself at the head of the table like he was the host, not just a guest. The waiter poured wine while I looked at the faces around me. Gary's sister looked embarrassed. His business partners seemed used to ignoring his bad behavior. "So, Alton," Gary continued, leaning back in his chair with clear satisfaction, "Judy tells me you're retired. Must be nice to have so much free time." "I stay busy enough." I kept my voice calm and businesslike. "What about your business projects? Judy mentioned you're working on something new and exciting." "Several projects, actually. You wouldn't understand the technology." He waved his hand dismissively. "It needs a certain kind of forward thinking that your generation struggles with." Judy reached across the table toward Gary. "He didn't mean..." "I meant exactly what I said." Gary's eyes never left my face. "Some people get stuck in old ways of thinking. Real estate, traditional investments, safe but boring." The older couple at the table exchanged glances. Gary's sister focused intensely on her salad, clearly wishing she were anywhere else. "Traditional approaches have their good points," I replied carefully. "Stability, a proven track record, actual ways of making money." Ways of making money? Gary laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. How wonderfully predictable. Tell me, did you ever take any real risks in your business, or did you just buy and sell houses like everyone else? Heat crept up my neck, but I stayed calm. Every business involves careful risks. The key is knowing the difference between a real chance and just wild guessing. Spoken like a true conservative, Gary raised his wine glass in a fake toast. No wonder Judy needed to find someone with actual vision for her future. Judy's face turned red. Gary, please. This is supposed to be a celebration. It is a celebration. We're celebrating Judy's escape from small-minded thinking. He leaned back, clearly enjoying himself. Though I suppose we should be thankful for the financial help, even if it comes with outdated advice. I felt my jaw clench, but forced my voice to stay steady. I'm here because I care about Judy's happiness. I hope we can find common ground. Common ground? Gary repeated the phrase like it tasted bad. You mean the ground where you approve of my choices, and I pretend to respect your opinions? The waiter appeared with our main dishes, a brief distraction, but Gary wasn't finished. He cut into his steak with exaggerated movements, the knife scraping against the plate. Actually, Alton, I've been thinking about our family dynamic going forward. Some boundaries might be necessary. Gary's wine glass was already half empty when the main course arrived. The alcohol had loosened any control he had, and his eyes held a cruel gleam that made my skin crawl. You know what? I've realized tonight, Gary announced, loud enough to draw attention from other tables. Family dinners work best when everyone knows their place. Judy's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Gary, maybe we should... No, let me finish. He held up his hand like he was directing an orchestra. Your father seems confused about his role in our upcoming marriage. I carefully placed my knife down, feeling the familiar quiet that came before important business deals. I'm not sure I understand. Oh, I think you do. Gary leaned forward, his voice dropping to a sneaky whisper that somehow felt more threatening than yelling. See, there's something we need to clarify about the wedding. The table went silent. Even Gary's usually chatty sister stopped eating, sensing the shift in mood. Gary straightened up, his voice returning to full volume. Listen, old man, you're not expected at the wedding tomorrow. The words hit like a punch. Around the table, I heard sharp gasps, the clink of silverware being put down too quickly. That's unacceptable. Judy's voice cracked with shock and anger. Gary, you can't just... Actually, I can. Gary's satisfaction was clear. It's our wedding, Judy. We get to decide who belongs there and who doesn't. Gary, stop this right now. Judy's hands shook as she reached toward him. This is my father we're talking about. Yes, your father, who's been questioning my every move since the moment we met. Gary turned back to me, his smile sharp as a razor. Judy, your father is ruining our evening again. I stared at him across the table, taking in the deliberate cruelty of the moment. This wasn't a sudden outburst. It was a planned humiliation, done in front of witnesses to show he was in charge. The other guests sat frozen, looking away like they were watching a car crash. Gary's sister had her hand pressed to her mouth. One of his business partners was studying his wine glass with intense focus. I see. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate with careful precision. Thank you for making the situation clear. Dad, please don't... Judy started to stand, but Gary's hand on her wrist stopped her. Let him go, sweetheart. Some people can't handle honest talk. I stood slowly, my movements controlled despite the anger building in my chest. 40 years of business meetings had taught me when to fight and when to step back smartly. This wasn't the time or place for a fight. Judy? I looked directly at my daughter, ignoring Gary completely. I love you. That will never change. Daddy, please. We can fix this. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't pull away from Gary's grip. Call me when you're ready to talk, really talk. I reached for my wallet, but Gary waved his hand dismissively. Don't worry about the check, Alton. I've got it covered. Of course he did, with my money filtered through Judy's account. I walked toward the exit with slow, steady steps, nodding politely to the hostess, keeping the dignity Gary had tried to take from me. Behind me, I heard Judy's voice rising in argument, Gary's answers growing more defensive. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped onto Rush Street. The city hummed around me, traffic, distant music, the laughter of people enjoying their Friday evening. Normal people with normal problems. I got my car from the valet, tipped him well, and sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine. My hands weren't shaking. My breathing was steady. But something deep inside me had changed. Gary Thompson had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The steering wheel felt solid under my hands as I drove away from the restaurant. Traffic moved slowly through downtown Chicago, giving me time to think about what had just happened. Red lights became chances to replay Gary's words, to understand the calculated cruelty behind his public humiliation. My phone buzzed with a call. Judy's name appeared on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. We both needed time to process this evening before any real conversation could happen. The city blurred past my windows, glass towers reflecting streetlights, people rushing to their Friday night plans, the ordinary rhythm of city life continuing, while my world had completely shifted. I'd walked into that restaurant believing that talking things out could fix any problem. I'd left knowing that Gary Thompson was something more dangerous than just someone looking for an easy ride. At North Lake Shore Drive, I made a sudden turn toward the waterfront instead of heading straight home to Oak Park. The familiar route to Montrose Harbor called to me, a place Helen and I used to visit when we needed to think through tough decisions. I parked facing Lake Michigan, the dark water stretching toward an unseen horizon. Chicago's skyline rose behind me, but ahead was nothing but darkness and the distant sound of waves against the barrier. This was where I came when business deals went wrong, when hard choices had to be made. Gary's behavior tonight hadn't been about wedding guest lists or family issues. It had been a show of power, a public demonstration that he controlled Judy completely. The way he'd gripped her wrist, the satisfaction in his voice when she defended him despite his cruelty. These weren't the actions of a man in love. I'd spent 40 years reading people across conference tables. The desperate ones talked too much. The dishonest ones dodged questions with aggression. The truly dangerous ones enjoyed causing pain. Gary Thompson enjoyed causing pain. My phone buzzed again. This time I checked the voicemail from Judy's earlier call. "Dad, I'm so sorry. Gary had too much wine and he's stressed about the wedding expenses. He didn't mean what he said. Please call me back. We need to fix this." She was making excuses for him, already rewriting tonight's events to make Gary the victim of circumstances rather than the one who deliberately caused the cruelty. I'd seen this pattern in business. People so invested in bad decisions they'd make up any reason to avoid admitting their mistake. But this wasn't business. This was my daughter's life. I stared out at the lake, remembering Helen's advice during our own parenting challenges. Sometimes protecting them means letting them make mistakes, but sometimes it means stepping in, even when they hate you for it. The question was, which situation was this? Gary's defensive aggression suggested someone with secrets worth protecting. His vague business descriptions, his expensive lifestyle with no clear income, his immediate hostility toward anyone asking questions. These weren't the signs of real success. I started the engine and drove back onto Lakeshore Drive, heading toward Oak Park with a new goal. Protecting Judy might need methods that went beyond a father's concern. It might need the same investigation skills that had made me successful in real estate. The ability to research, to ask the right questions, to uncover what people preferred to keep hidden. By the time I reached my driveway, the decision was made. I wouldn't wait for Gary to destroy my daughter's life from the inside. I wouldn't hope that love would somehow overcome obvious warning signs. Starting tomorrow, I'd find out exactly who Gary Thompson really was. The wedding place by the lake sparkled under the afternoon sun. Its huge windows showed the endless blue of Lake Michigan. White flowers hung from everywhere, and a string quartet played soft music near the dance floor, where Judy moved like a dream in her flowing dress. She looked incredibly happy, truly radiant, completely unaware of the storm about to hit her perfect day. I straightened my tie and walked inside, noting the layout with a businessman's eye for strategy. The reception hall ran along the water, with several exits and clear views, perfect for what was coming. The irony wasn't lost on me, standing in the shadows at my own daughter's wedding, waiting to ruin her husband's life. Gary held court near the bar, waving his champagne glass grandly, surrounded by people who hung on his every word about new technologies and market breakthroughs. His expensive tuxedo fit perfectly, probably paid for with someone else's money. The confident smile, the casual way he accepted congratulations. He truly believed he'd won yesterday's fight. I stood at the back of the venue, near the service entrance Curtis would use when he arrived. From here, I could see everything while staying out of sight. Wedding guests mingled with the easy grace that money could buy. I recognized some faces from Gary's dinner party, others from Judy's college years. They laughed and clinked glasses, celebrating what they thought was a love story. None of them suspected they were watching the final act of a complex lie. My phone buzzed with a text from Curtis. "Parking now. Legal papers ready. Give me 5 minutes." The plan was simple and clever. Curtis would come in at the peak of the celebration, when Gary felt most secure and had the biggest audience. Public humiliation would serve justice better than a private talk. Gary had chosen to embarrass me in front of witnesses. Now he'd find out how it felt to be exposed when it mattered most. Judy spun across the dance floor, her dress flowing like water, her smile bright enough to power the lights in the room. For a moment, my resolve wavered. This was her wedding day, the moment she'd dreamed about since childhood. Was I about to destroy her happiness just to get my revenge? Then I remembered Gary's words from last night. "Your father is ruining our evening." The cold cruelty, the public dismissal, the way he'd gripped Judy's wrist when she tried to defend me. This wasn't about my hurt pride. It was about protecting my daughter from a predator who saw her as a way to get what he wanted. Gary's laughter carried across the room as he told some story to his rapt audience. He gestured toward the lake, probably taking credit for choosing such an expensive place. Everything about him was a show, from his practiced charm to his fake confidence. The string quartet started playing something lighter, more festive. Guests gathered around the newlyweds for photos. Phones snapped pictures of what they thought was pure joy. In a few minutes, those same phones would be recording something totally different. I checked my watch. Curtis should be walking through the entrance any moment. Gary continued his act, completely unaware that his past was about to crash into his present in a spectacular way. Across the room, Gary's gaze swept the crowd, soaking in the attention, enjoying his temporary win. Then his eyes found mine. His champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. The confident smile flickered and died. Gary's face changed from celebration to pure rage in a heartbeat. He shoved his champagne glass at the nearest guest and began cutting through the crowd with a fierce look. His expensive tuxedo made him look like a shark in formal wear. Conversation stopped as he pushed past dancing couples and chattering groups. The string quartet played on, but the wedding atmosphere shifted as guests sensed a confrontation coming. Judy looked up from her photographs, confusion clouding her radiant face. "What are you doing here?" Gary's voice boomed across the reception hall, cutting through music and laughter like a knife. "You weren't invited yesterday." The words echoed off the glass walls, reaching every corner of the venue. The string quartet stumbled into silence. Guests turned toward us, their faces showing everything from shock to fascination. Phones instinctively rose to capture whatever drama was about to unfold. I stayed calm, my hands clasped behind my back, watching Gary's public meltdown with a professional detachment. This was exactly what I'd hoped for, his arrogance on full display for everyone to witness. "Gary, please." Judy started toward us, her wedding dress rustling urgently. "No." He held up a trembling hand, alcohol and rage making his voice crack. This man disrespected me, disrespected our relationship, and now he shows up uninvited to ruin our wedding. "I'm leaving," I said quietly. my voice carrying despite its controlled volume. But first, let me introduce you to my special guest. I gestured toward the entrance where Curtis Blackwell had just appeared with perfect timing. I believe you know your old friend. Curtis Blackwell commanded attention the moment he entered. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a dark gray suit that screamed serious money, he carried himself with the authority of someone used to boardrooms and high-stakes talks. His briefcase looked expensive and official. Gary's aggressive stance crumbled as he recognized Curtis. His face went white, then gray, all color draining away like water from a broken sink. Gary Thompson. Curtis's voice carried the sharp authority of courtrooms and corporate takeovers. I finally found you. Wedding guests murmured in confusion, sensing something big was happening, but unable to understand what they were seeing. Gary stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish gasping for air. Curtis approached with slow, steady steps, each footfall echoing in the suddenly quiet reception hall. He opened his briefcase with practiced ease and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. Gary Thompson, you are hereby served with legal papers demanding repayment of $100,000 to $200,000 plus accumulated interest and legal fees, which you fraudulently obtained from Blackwell Venture Capital under false pretenses. The words fell like hammer blows. Gary's hand shook as Curtis pressed the papers into them, but he seemed unable to process what was happening. His carefully built world was falling apart in real time, in front of everyone who mattered to his new life. Judy gasped, her bouquet falling from her numb fingers. $1 million? Gary, what is he talking about? Wedding guests pressed closer, no longer pretending polite disinterest. Cell phones captured every moment as Gary stared at the legal documents like they were written in a foreign language. 2 years, Curtis continued, his voice carrying throughout the silent hall. 2 years I've been looking for you, Mr. Thompson. You disappeared with my money, left a trail of forged documents, and thought you could reinvent yourself with someone else's daughter. Gary's knees buckled slightly. He gripped the papers with white knuckles, his wedding day confidence disappearing like morning mist. The man who'd humiliated me less than 24 hours ago now looked like a cornered animal. Gary! Judy's voice cracked with growing horror. Is this true? Did you steal money? But Gary couldn't answer. He stood paralyzed, holding proof of his crimes, while his new bride and her wedding guests watched his careful facade crumble into dust. Gary's hands trembled as he read the court summons, his eyes darting across the legal words that spelled out his financial ruin. The elegant wedding venue had become a courtroom, with 150 guests serving as a jury to witness his complete destruction. $1.2 million plus interest, he whispered, the numbers seeming to physically wound him. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the lake breeze flowing through the open windows. His expensive tuxedo suddenly looked like a costume, a prop in a performance that had finally been exposed. Wedding guests pushed closer, their celebration forgotten in favor of the unfolding drama. Smartphones recorded every moment of Gary's breakdown, capturing his transformation from confident groom to exposed criminal. The string quartet stood frozen with their instruments, unsure whether to continue playing for a party that no longer existed. Curtis observed Gary's reaction with professional satisfaction. Alton, thank you, he said, extending his hand toward me. I've been searching for this man for 2 years. Your business contacts proved invaluable in tracking him down. Justice needed to be served, I replied simply, shaking his hand. The words carried weight in the silent reception hall, explaining everything and nothing to the confused wedding guests. Judy stood paralyzed in her wedding gown, bouquet scattered at her feet like broken dreams. Gary, please tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't steal money from people. But Gary couldn't speak. The court papers shook in his grip as he read details of forged documents, fake companies, and elaborate schemes that had funded his lavish lifestyle. Every expensive dinner, every designer suit, every romantic gesture, all paid for with stolen money. The wedding, Judy whispered, understanding dawning in her voice. The venue, the flowers, my dress. Where did the money come from? Gary's silence answered everything. His carefully constructed identity was disintegrating in real time, leaving behind only the truth of what he really was. A common thief who'd used my daughter's love as cover for his criminal activities. Curtis closed his briefcase with a decisive snap. "Mr. Thompson, you have 30 days to respond to this summons. I suggest you find a good attorney." He turned to me with genuine gratitude. "Thank you again, Alton. The authorities will want to speak with you about how you located him." The wedding reception had completely fallen apart around us. Guests gathered in shocked clusters, whispers and pointed fingers replacing celebration and congratulations. The elegant lakefront venue with its panoramic views and perfect flowers had become the scene of public humiliation and criminal exposure. I looked at my daughter, still beautiful in her wedding dress, but now understanding that her marriage was built on lies and stolen money. The pain in her eyes cut deep, but beneath it, I saw the first glimmers of recognition. Her father hadn't been trying to control her life, but to protect it. "Judy," I said softly, crossing to where she stood, frozen among the scattered flowers. "I'm sorry it had to happen this way." She looked up at me with eyes full of tears and confusion. You knew what he was." "I suspected. I investigated. I found Curtis." I touched her shoulder gently. Sometimes protecting the people we love means doing things they don't understand until later. Gary finally found his voice, but it came out as a broken whisper. "Judy, I can explain. This is all a misunderstanding. I was going to pay it back." "With what money?" Curtis interrupted coldly. "You have no legitimate business, no real income, no assets except what you've stolen from others." The truth hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Gary's empire of lies had collapsed in less than 10 minutes, leaving nothing but legal papers and broken promises. Curtis and I walked toward the exit together, our business concluded. Behind us, the elegant wedding reception continued its transformation into something resembling a crime scene, complete with witnesses and evidence. Justice had been served with perfect timing and devastating effectiveness. The drive home felt different than any I'd taken before. Oak Park's familiar tree-lined streets seemed more peaceful, more settled, as if the neighborhood itself knew justice had been served. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, reviewing the afternoon's events with the satisfaction of a businessman who'd just closed the most important deal of his career. Inside my house, the silence felt productive rather than empty. I went straight to my home office where wedding contracts and financial documents waited in neat stacks on my desk. Helen had always admired my organizational systems, everything filed, labeled, easily accessible for moments exactly like this. My first call went to First National's private banking line where Margaret Henderson had handled my accounts for 15 years. "Mr. Stewart, how can I assist you today?" "Margaret, I need to stop a wire transfer scheduled for tomorrow, $50,000 to Fairmont Catering Services." "Of course. May I have the reference number?" I read the confirmation number from my notes, listening to her keyboard clicks as she located the transaction. "Found it. This was scheduled as final payment for wedding services. Shall I cancel the entire transfer?" "Yes. The contracts have been voided due to fraud discovery." "I'll handle that immediately. You'll receive written confirmation within 24 hours. The efficiency felt satisfying. No questions, no judgment, just professional service handling legitimate business needs. Next came the vendor calls. Systematic, methodical. Each conversation documented with the precision I'd used throughout my real estate career. The florist answered first. "Stewart Thompson wedding." "Oh my, we heard the reception ended quite abruptly. Is everything all right?" "The contracts are void due to fraud discovery. I'm stopping all payments effective immediately." Her tone shifted to business mode. "I see. Well, the flowers were delivered and displayed. We'll need to discuss partial payment for services rendered. Send me an itemized invoice. Address collection efforts to Gary Thompson." Each call followed the same pattern. The caterer expressed concern about the reception ending early. The band wanted to know about final payment for their 3-hour performance. The photographer asked about delivery of wedding photos. To each, I gave the same professional response. Fraud discovered, contracts void. Pursue Gary Thompson for payment. By 7, I'd completed 9 calls and stopped 6 different payment authorizations. The total financial impact would hit Gary and Judy with approximately $38,000 in immediate vendor bills, money that would have to come from somewhere other than my accounts. I felt a brief pang of concern for Judy. She'd wake up tomorrow facing financial realities she'd never experienced, bills that her fraudulent husband couldn't pay with stolen money. But sometimes protecting people required letting them feel the consequences of their choices. My phone rang as I organized the final confirmation documents. Caller ID, Judy. I looked at the screen for a long moment, then let it ring through to voicemail. She needed time to understand what Gary really was before we could have any productive conversation. Tonight she was probably still angry at me for ruining her wedding. Tomorrow she might begin understanding that I'd saved her from something much worse. The phone rang again before I'd finished filing the banking confirmations. Judy's name appeared on the screen, disappeared when I didn't answer, then appeared again 3 minutes later. I moved to the kitchen and started preparing a simple dinner. Grilled chicken breast, steamed vegetables, brown rice, normal, methodical, peaceful. The phone rang twice more while I seasoned the chicken. In the living room, I settled into my favorite armchair with a cup of tea and the evening news. Chicago's mayor was discussing infrastructure improvements. The Cubs had won their home opener. Spring weather would continue through the week. The phone rang during the sports segment. Judy again. I sipped my tea and listened to the weather forecast, trying to remember if I'd planned any weekend projects that might be affected by potential rain. The garden needed attention, but that could wait until after this family crisis resolved itself. 15 minutes later, another call, then another. The pattern became predictable. Every 5 to 10 minutes, Judy's name would light up the screen. I found myself counting. Call 7 during the national news. Call 8 during a commercial break. Call 9 when the local anchor returned. By 8:30, the count had reached 18. I switched to a documentary about Antarctic wildlife, finding the penguin colonies more peaceful than the drama playing out through my phone. Even the harsh realities of survival in nature seemed simpler than human relationships. Call 23 came during footage of leopard seals hunting. Call 24 interrupted information about ice shelf formations. I refilled my tea and adjusted my reading glasses, settling in for what promised to be a long evening. The documentary ended at 9:15, call count 31. I channel surfed briefly, settling on a British mystery series Helen had enjoyed. The detective was questioning suspects in a country manner, each person hiding secrets that would eventually surface. Art imitating life with better dialogue and more civilized settings. Between 9:15 and 10 d.m., 12 more calls came through. The desperation was palpable, even without answering. Shorter intervals between attempts, the phone barely silent before ringing again. Call 44 arrived at 10:07. I turned off the television and began my evening routine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new opportunities for Judy to understand why her father had acted with such apparent cruelty. Tonight she was learning that actions had consequences, that fraudulent husbands came with unexpected costs, that independence required more than just declaring it. In the bathroom, I brushed my teeth while the phone remained blessedly silent for almost 8 minutes. Call 45 interrupted me while I was changing into pajamas. By the time I turned off the lights and settled into bed, Judy had called 44 times in 3 hours. I switched the phone to silent mode and placed it face down on the nightstand. She would need to solve this crisis herself without her father's financial rescue. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent could do was refuse to answer the phone. 3 weeks later, I sat in the Cook County Courthouse watching Gary Thompson receive his sentence. The man who'd confidently humiliated me at dinner now looked 20 years older, his expensive suits replaced by county jail orange, his arrogant demeanor crushed by the weight of multiple felony convictions. The defendant will serve 18 months in state prison and pay full restitution of $1.4 million to the victims identified in this case, Judge Martinez announced with professional finality. Curtis leaned over from the bench beside me. 14 victims total. The investigation uncovered much more than just my case. Gary had built an entire criminal enterprise on charm and borrowed credibility, investment schemes, fake partnerships, forged documents. The scope of his fraud made my daughter's narrow escape seem even more fortunate. Outside the courthouse, Curtis shook my hand with genuine gratitude. I never would have found him without your business connections, Alton. Thank you for calling me that night. Justice needed to be served, I replied. The same words I'd used at Judy's wedding. They still felt appropriate. Curtis walked toward his car, briefcase full of restitution paperwork that would eventually recover most of his stolen money. I stood on the courthouse steps watching Chicago's afternoon traffic flow past, wondering if my daughter was ready to rebuild our relationship. That evening, I finally called her. Dad. Her voice sounded different, older, more cautious, but without the defensive anger I'd expected. Hello, sweetheart. I thought it was time we talked. I've been waiting for you to call. A pause. I learned about the other victims. 14 people, Dad. Gary stole money from 14 different people. I know. I attended his sentencing today. You were there? Another pause, longer this time. I should have been there too, but I couldn't face seeing him again. You don't need to face him ever again. The vendors have been calling constantly. The bills, the canceled payments. I understand now what you did and why. Her voice caught slightly. I'm sorry I didn't listen to your concerns about Gary. Come home for dinner tomorrow, I said. We have a lot to discuss. The next evening, Judy arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the kind of practical business clothes that suggested she was taking her career more seriously. She looked tired but stronger, like someone who'd survived a test and learned important lessons. You saved me from becoming victim number 15, she said as we sat down to dinner. I protected my daughter. That's what fathers do, even when their daughters are too stubborn to appreciate it. She raised her wine glass. To wisdom gained through hardship. We talked until nearly midnight about trust, independence, financial responsibility, and the difference between supporting someone and enabling their mistakes. Judy had spent 3 weeks discovering what life was like without her father's safety net, and the experience had taught her more about self-reliance than any lecture could have managed. I'm going to pay you back, she said as we cleared the dinner plates. Every dollar from the vendors, from the wedding expenses, everything. It might take a while, but I'll pay it all back. Keep your money, I told her. Consider it tuition for one of life's most important lessons. She hugged me then, really hugged me, for the first time since before she'd met Gary Thompson. Justice had been served. Family bonds had been tested and strengthened, and my daughter had emerged wiser, more independent, and finally safe from the charming predator who'd almost destroyed her life. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.